Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful idea that helps explain how we learn things for real, and not just for the test. We're talking about Bloom's taxonomy. So let's start with a feeling I think we all know. You spend all night cramming for a test, you pour every fact into your brain, you ace it, and then what happens a week later? It's like, poof, it's all gone. So frustrating, right? Well, that feeling gets at a really fundamental truth. There is a huge difference between just being able to spit back facts for a little while and actually truly learning something, making it part of how you think. So how do we get from one to the other? Well, believe it or not, this isn't a new problem. Way back in the 1950s, an educational psychologist looked around and saw a system that was getting really good at teaching students how to pass tests, but not so good at teaching them how to think. He saw that it was all about memorizing, and he knew we could do better. And that psychologist? His name was Dr. Benjamin Bloom. In 1956, he introduced a framework that would completely change how we think about education. And this wasn't just some dusty old theory either. His work was so groundbreaking, it actually led to the creation of the Head Start program. That's some serious real-world impact. And this quote really gets to the heart of it. Bloom's whole point wasn't that remembering facts is bad. It's that remembering facts shouldn't be the final destination. It should be the starting point for promoting these higher forms of thinking. So how did he do this? He created what's called a taxonomy, which is just a fancy word for a classification system. But honestly, the best way to picture it is as a ladder for learning. You've got to get your footing on the lower rungs before you can safely climb any higher. So these were the 6 original rungs on his ladder. It all starts at the bottom with the basics, right? Knowledge and comprehension. Then you start moving up to actually using that knowledge with application and breaking it down with analysis. And then you get to the really high-level stuff at the top, synthesis, which is about creating something new, and evaluation, which is about judging value. All right, so let's start at the very bottom, rung number 1, knowledge. This is exactly what it sounds like, pure memorization. Recalling a date, defining a word. It's like knowing the list of ingredients for a recipe. You can name them, but that's about it. From there, we take one step up to comprehension. Now you can do more than just list the ingredients. You can explain what each one actually does. You get the why behind the facts. You can put the idea into your own words, which, is a huge step forward. So you know the ingredients, you understand what they do. Now what? Now you climb up to application. This is where learning gets active. It's about taking what you know and actually using it to solve a problem. In our recipe example, this is when you finally start cooking the dish. You're putting theory into practice. Okay, so that original framework was brilliant. But like any truly great idea, it didn't just sit there. It evolved. And in the mid-90s, one of Bloom's own former students, a guy named Lauren Anderson, led the charge to update it for a new generation. And one of the biggest changes they made seems so simple, but it's actually really powerful. They switched the names of the levels from nouns to verbs. So knowledge became remembering, comprehension became understanding. It's more than just a grammar fix. It completely reframes learning as an active process. It's not something you have, it's something you do. But they made an even bigger change at the very top of the ladder. See, in the original version, evaluation was the peak, judging something's worth. But in the revision, they flipped the top 2 levels and put a brand new skill at the very pinnacle, creating. The idea is that the highest form of understanding isn't just to judge something, it's to create something new yourself. So far, we've only been talking about what goes on inside our heads, right? The thinking skills. But Bloom was way ahead of his time on this. He knew that real, deep learning is about way more than just your brain.
He actually identified 3 big areas of learning. There's the cognitive domain, that's all the thinking stuff we just covered. Then there's the psychomotor domain, which is all about physical skills, learning to type or play an instrument. And finally, the affective domain, which covers our emotions, attitudes, and motivation. It's the heart part of learning.
Here's a super easy way to remember that. KSA, knowledge, skills, and attitude. Because true holistic learning, the kind that really sticks, involves all 3. It's your mind, your body, and your heart, all working together. Okay, so this theory is all pretty cool, but let's get down to it. What does this actually mean for you? How can you use this? Well, this taxonomy is much more than a concept. It's a practical toolkit you can use every single day. This is where it gets really, really useful. You can basically map any learning activity to a level of thinking. So, just watching a lecture or reading a chapter, you're probably in the remembering zone. But if you're actively trying to solve a problem or practice a new skill, you've climbed up to applying. And when you have to write an original paper or design a new model from scratch, boom, you're at the very top, in the creating zone. Now, a really common mistake is to look at this ladder and think that the bottom rungs are, bad or unimportant, but that is not true at all. You absolutely cannot analyze or create something new without that solid foundation of remembering and understanding. Those lower levels are the essential building blocks for everything else. Of course, no model is perfect, and critics rightly point out that learning isn't always this neat, clean, step-by-step climb. Sometimes we have to get our hands dirty and try applying a concept before we can really truly understand it. Just think about learning to code. A lot of times you start writing code first, and that's how you figure out the theory behind it. So here's the big takeaway. It's much better to think of Bloom's taxonomy as a map, not a rigid ladder. It's an amazing tool you can use to diagnose what kind of thinking you're doing at any given moment, and then consciously plan how to push yourself into deeper, more powerful forms of learning. So I'll leave you with a question. The next time you sit down to learn something new, for work, for a hobby, for school, whatever, just take a second and ask yourself, which rung of the ladder am I on right now? And more importantly, what can I do to start climbing higher?